My friend, an airline pilot, called me. I need to ask you something strange. Your husband. Is he home right now? Yes, I replied, he's sitting in the living room. Her voice dropped to a whisper. That can't be true. Because I'm watching him with your stepsister right now. They just boarded my flight to Hawaii. Just then, I heard the door open behind me. Hello everyone. Thank you for being here with me today. Before I begin my story, I'd love to know which city you're joining us from. Please feel free to share in the comments. Now, let me take you into this story. You know, it's funny how a life can change in a single moment. Not with a big explosion or a dramatic crash. Sometimes, it's with something as quiet and ordinary as a phone call on a Tuesday morning. For 17 years, my life with Russell was predictable. It was comfortable. It was built on the solid bedrock of routine, and I, a forensic accountant, have always found a deep, abiding comfort in things that make sense. Things that add up. Our life, I thought with a quiet satisfaction, added up perfectly. Until the day the math was wrong. The day the numbers lied. The day everything I thought was a solid asset turned out to be a catastrophic liability. It was a Tuesday. I remember the exact quality of the light slanting into our Chicago kitchen, that soft, hazy gold of early autumn. It caught the steam rising in lazy spirals from my favorite ceramic coffee cup, a heavy, forest green mug Russell had bought me on a trip to Asheville years ago. It was 8:15 a.m. Through the doorway, I could hear the familiar, comforting rustle of newspaper pages as Russell sat in his worn leather armchair in the living room, meticulously scanning the financial section of the Tribune. It was a ritual as ingrained as breathing. The whole morning was a symphony of comfortable habit. The smell of the dark roast coffee beans I'd ground myself, a special blend from a little shop in Lincoln Park, mingled with the warm, buttery scent of the sourdough toast I'd just popped from the toaster. It was the picture of domestic tranquility, a scene replayed thousands of times, the quiet backdrop to a stable, loving marriage. That's why, when my phone buzzed on the granite countertop and I saw Brenda's name flash on the screen, I smiled. It was just another normal note in a normal day. Brenda's been my best friend since we were 18-year-old college roommates, navigating the treacherous waters of terrible dorm food and even worse boyfriends. We were opposites. She was the adventurous one, always dreaming of the sky, while I was the grounded one, finding my thrill in numbers that balanced perfectly. Now, she's a senior pilot for United, a captain, crisscrossing the globe while I stay on the ground, navigating the intricate spreadsheets of corporate finance. Hey you, I answered, my voice light as I spread a thin layer of butter on my toast. Shouldn't you be somewhere over the Atlantic right now, charming some French air traffic controller? Her voice came back, but it was flat, tight. All the usual warmth was gone, replaced by a strange, clipped tension. Judith. I'm at O'Hare. But I need to ask you something strange. I stopped what I was doing, the butter knife hovering over the bread. My internal antenna, the one I used to sense when a CEO was about to lie to my face, began to quiver. Okay. I said slowly. Russell, she said, her voice dropping so low I had to press the phone harder to my ear. Your husband, is he home right now? The question was so bizarre it threw me for a loop. I glanced through the doorway again, just to be sure. There he was. The same favorite gray cashmere sweater I'd bought him for Christmas 2 years ago, the one that made his eyes look bluer. His reading glasses were perched on the end of his nose, the way they always were when he was concentrating. Yeah, of course, I replied, forcing a small laugh. He's right here, sitting in the living room, probably getting angry at the stock market. Why? A heavy, crackling silence stretched over the line. For a full 5 seconds, all I could hear was a faint static. I thought the call had dropped. Bren? Are you there? Then, her voice came back, a mere whisper, but every single word landed like a shard of ice lodging itself deep in my chest. That can't be true, Judith. What are you talking about, Bren? I'm looking right at him. He's 10 feet away from me. No, she insisted, her voice gaining an urgent, desperate edge. That's impossible. Because I'm looking at him, too. Right now. I'm in the cockpit, looking out at the boarding gate. And he is standing there. With your stepsister, Lorraine. They just handed their boarding passes to the gate agent. They just boarded my flight to Hawaii. Business class, seats 3B and 3C. The world tilted on its axis. My brain simply couldn't compute the information. It was like trying to solve an equation where 2 plus 2 equaled fish. It was a glitch in reality, a tear in the fabric of my life. A mistake. It had to be a mistake. Maybe it was someone who just looked like Russell. A doppelganger. Someone who, by some cosmic coincidence, also happened to be traveling with someone who looked just like Lorraine. My stepsister, the one whose sweetness was always a little too saccharine, whose compliments always had a hidden barb. The one who always seemed to want whatever I had. You must be mistaken, I stammered, my throat suddenly as dry as dust. It has to be someone else. You're seeing things. Judith, Brenda said, her voice firm now, cutting through my denial. I've known Russell for almost 20 years. I had dinner with you both 3 weeks ago. I know the way he holds his head when he's listening to someone, tilted slightly to the left. I know that stupid little mole on his left temple he's always been self-conscious about. It's him. And she just rested her head on his shoulder. Like she's done it 1,000 times. Just then, I heard the familiar creak of the floorboards in the hallway behind me. I spun around, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it might break through. Russell stood in the kitchen doorway, that familiar, easy smile on his face, holding his empty coffee mug. "Who is that on the phone so early, honey?" he asked, his voice the same warm, comforting baritone I'd woken up to for 17 years. And in that single, terrifying moment, my perfectly ordered world, the one that had always added up, fractured into a million impossible, jagged pieces. I stared at the man in my kitchen. My husband. The man Brenda had just seen boarding a plane to paradise with my stepsister. My mind was a screaming whirlwind of denial and pure, unadulterated panic, but years of sitting across from powerful men lying about missing millions had taught me to build a fortress around my emotions. My face, I prayed, was a perfect blank slate. I had to be an actor now, too. "Oh, just Brenda," I said, amazed at how steady and casual my voice sounded. It felt like it was coming from someone else. You know, pre-flight check-in stuff. She was complaining about some weather over the Pacific, worried about turbulence. It was a weak lie, but it was the best I could do. Russell nodded absently, his attention already shifting back to the gleaming chrome coffee pot on the counter. He was completely oblivious. Or he was a phenomenal actor. "Tell her we said hi," he murmured, pouring himself another cup. "Maybe we should finally take her up on those flight benefits she's always offering us. We could use a vacation." The irony was a bitter, metallic taste in my mouth. A vacation. I gripped the edge of the granite countertop, the cold stone biting into my palms, grounding me. I watched him, my brain no longer seeing a husband, but a puzzle. A set of data points to be analyzed. The gray sweater I bought him for Christmas at Nordstrom. The way he held his mug with his left hand while scrolling through his phone with his right. The familiar lines around his eyes when he smiled. Everything was exactly as it should be. And yet, I now knew with a terrifying certainty, everything was a lie. My phone buzzed in my hand, a silent, urgent vibration. A new message from Brenda. My thumb trembled as I swiped the screen open. Proof. Below the single word was a photo. It was slightly blurry, clearly taken in haste, from an angle, through what looked like an airplane window. But it was clear enough. There was no denying it. It was Russell's profile, the sharp, aristocratic line of his jaw, the way his dark hair curled slightly behind his ears. And sitting next to him, her blonde head tilted towards him in a gesture of easy intimacy, was Lorraine. Her manicured hand, I recognized the gaudy ring her father had given her, was resting on his forearm. They were laughing. I felt a hot, suffocating flush crawl up my neck and spread across my face. I looked from the smiling, intimate man on my phone screen to the oblivious man in my kitchen, who was now complaining about a drop in the Dow Jones Industrial Average. They were identical. It was impossible. My mind scrambled for a rational explanation. A prank. An elaborate, incredibly cruel joke. But Brenda would never, ever do that to me. And Lorraine. Lorraine was capable of anything. My mind flashed back, unbidden, to my wedding day. I saw Lorraine in the receiving line, wearing a cream-colored dress that was just a shade too close to white. I remembered the toast she gave, filled with backhanded compliments. Judith has always been the sensible one, the planner, she'd said, raising her glass. I'm so glad she finally found someone to take care of her. At the time, I'd brushed it off as her usual passive aggression. Now, I saw it in a new, sinister light. All those years, all those little digs and jealous glances, was this what it had all been leading up to? I needed to know. I had to know which version of my husband was real, and which one was a ghost. An idea, cold and clear and sharp as a shard of glass, formed in my mind. It was a test. A simple, domestic test, born out of a desperate need to poke a hole in the surreal new reality. Actually, I said, my voice suddenly bright, almost manic, I think I'll make pancakes. Russell looked up from his phone, a genuinely surprised eyebrow raised. Pancakes? On a Tuesday? What's the occasion? It's not your birthday, is it? He chuckled, but his eyes were watchful. The occasion was that my world had split in two, and I needed to figure out which half was the lie. But I couldn't say that. Can't a wife just feel like making her husband a special breakfast? I replied, forcing a playful, almost flirtatious smile. He chuckled again, a warm, familiar sound that now seemed utterly alien. Of course. Though you know I have my squash game at 11. Can't be late, Bob is a stickler. Plenty of time, I said, turning towards the pantry with a brisk, purposeful energy I didn't feel. Flour. Eggs. Milk. Sugar. Simple, solid ingredients that followed rules. Unlike the man in my kitchen. As my hands went through the familiar motions, measuring, cracking, whisking, my mind raced, replaying the last few months, but now with a harsh, analytical filter. I was no longer a wife remembering her life, I was an auditor searching for discrepancies. And now that I was looking, I saw them everywhere. There was that weekend he'd supposedly gone to a financial conference in Boston. I remember the night he came back. I'd been excited to see him, had a nice dinner planned. He walked in, dropped his bags, and gave me a perfunctory kiss. I remember smelling something on his collar, a faint, floral, expensive scent. Nothing like my own sandalwood and vanilla perfume. What's that smell? I'd asked lightly. He'd laughed it off. Must be from the hotel soap. You know how fancy they get at these things. He'd seemed tired, distant. I'd chalked it up to a long weekend of work. I'd accepted his explanation. Why wouldn't I? And then there was the strangest discrepancy of all. Lately, he'd been perfect. Too perfect. The real Russell, the one I'd lived with for 17 years, was a wonderful man, but he was also a creature of habit and minor flaws. He always left his wet towel on the bed. He was incapable of rinsing a dish before putting it in the dishwasher. He snored, especially after a glass of wine. But for the last 3 months, the towel was always hung up. The dishes were always rinsed. And the snoring, it had stopped. It was like living with a polished, upgraded version of my husband. An imposter. The thought sent a fresh wave of ice through my veins. I love you, he said suddenly, his voice startling me from my reverie. He had walked up behind me and was wrapping his arms around my waist. He kissed my forehead. His lips were warm, familiar. But the gesture felt hollow, rehearsed. It was a line delivered from a script I was just now realizing existed. "I love you, too," I replied automatically, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. I finished the pancakes, sliding a golden brown stack onto his plate. I watched him pour a generous amount of maple syrup over them, watched him take the first eager bite. He chewed, swallowed, and smiled that perfect, familiar smile. "Delicious, honey." As always. It was a perfect performance. But the test wasn't over. As he was grabbing his gym bag from the hall closet, I sent a short, frantic text to Brenda, my fingers fumbling with the keys. "Don't let that plane take off. Create a delay. A mechanical issue. Anything." Her reply came back instantly, a single, heartbreaking sentence. "Too late, Jude. We're already 30,000 feet over Indiana." I watched him walk out the front door, turning to wave goodbye with that same easy, unreadable smile. The door clicked shut, the deadbolt slid into place, and the silence in the apartment was deafening. One husband was gone for the morning. The other was halfway across the country, flying towards paradise with my stepsister. And I was left alone in the wreckage, with a plate of cold pancakes and a terrifying mystery that I had to solve. The moment the door clicked shut, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't collapse into a heap on the floor. The forensic accountant in me, the calm, methodical professional I'd been for 2 decades, took over. Emotion was a liability, data was truth. Right now, I needed truth more than I needed air. I walked directly into Russell's home office, a room that had always felt like his inner sanctum. The mahogany desk we'd bought at an estate sale in the Hamptons, the framed diplomas from Wharton hanging on the wall, the meticulously organized bookshelves. It was all a testament to a man who, I thought, lived a life of order and integrity. But I knew better than anyone that the most elaborate deceptions are often hidden behind the neatest facades. My job was to find the cracks. I bypassed his computer and went straight to my own laptop, my fingers flying across the keyboard with a speed and precision born of habit. I logged into our primary joint accounts. For 17 years, I'd managed our finances, our investments, our retirement funds, the college fund we'd started for our niece. I knew every transaction, every recurring payment, the rhythm of our financial life. Or so I thought. I started with the credit card statements, going back not just 6 months, but a full year. My breath hitched in my throat. There it was again, laid out in cold, hard black and white. The charge from the Four Seasons in Maui, dated 3 months ago, the weekend of the financial conference in Boston. I clicked to see the itemized receipt. It wasn't just for a room. It was for the Ali'i Royal Suite. The couple's deep tissue massage package. Room service for 2, every single night, featuring champagne and oysters. And a significant purchase from the hotel's luxury boutique, a line item for a Cartier love bracelet. A bracelet I had never seen. My hands started to tremble, a fine, uncontrollable tremor. I kept digging, my search becoming more frantic. I pulled up our joint investment portfolio with Vanguard. On the surface, the balance looked about right. But when I delved deeper, into the granular transaction history, I found it. It was subtle, elegant in its treachery. A pattern of withdrawals, stretching back over the last year. Small amounts at first, $5,000 here, $8,000 there. Then they became more frequent, more audacious. Always, just under the $10,000 federal reporting threshold that would trigger an automatic alert to the IRS. It was a systematic, methodical siphoning of our life savings, the kind of sophisticated, layered fraud I'd seen in countless corporate cases. I opened a new spreadsheet, my fingers moving on autopilot. I began to trace the money. Each withdrawal was funneled through a series of anonymous shell companies. Lux Corp International, registered in the Cayman Islands. Meridian Holdings, based in Panama. Apex Global, a ghost company in Cyprus. Corporate structures designed for one purpose: to make money disappear. To hide marital assets from people exactly like me. I created a new column in my spreadsheet: stolen. As I entered each fraudulent transaction, the number at the bottom of the column grew. $50,000. $150,000. $400,000. I felt physically ill, a cold knot of dread tightening in my stomach. This wasn't just a man having an affair. This was a predator. A calculated, long-term plan to liquidate our entire net worth. He was stealing from me. From us. He was dismantling our life together, one untraceable wire transfer at a time. The man who kissed my forehead this morning, the one who ate my pancakes and complimented my cooking, he was the cover story. He was the anesthesia, designed to keep me numb and unaware while the real Russell performed the surgery, cutting me out of my own life. My phone rang on the desk, the sudden noise making me jump. It was an unlisted number. I hesitated, my mind racing, then answered, my voice a tight whisper. Hello? Judith? It's Diane. We need to talk. Now. Diane and I had been roommates at NYU a lifetime ago. Our paths diverged sharply after graduation. I went into the buttoned-up world of corporate accounting, while she went into what she cryptically called private intelligence. After her own spectacularly messy divorce from a cheating Wall Street trader, she turned her formidable skills in digital forensics and surveillance into a thriving business. She was the person you called when you suspected your world was a meticulously constructed lie. I'm 15 minutes away, she said without preamble, her voice all business. Don't touch anything. Don't talk to him. And Judith, you need to prepare yourself. What I found, it's extensive. While I waited, the silence of the apartment pressing in on me, my mind churned, focusing on the second betrayal. Russell and Lorraine. It wasn't just the infidelity, it was the history, the deep, poisoned roots of it all. I was suddenly 14 again, standing awkwardly in the living room of our new blended family home. My mother, a widow for 5 years, had just married Lorraine's father. Lorraine, then 16, arrived in my life like a storm, all perfectly highlighted blonde hair and sharp, assessing blue eyes. She immediately laid claim to the bigger bedroom, borrowed my favorite sweaters that would then vanish forever, and made a sport of flirting with boys I had crushes on, just to prove that she could. I remembered one specific afternoon vividly. I'd saved up for weeks to buy a delicate silver locket. I'd worn it to school one day, and Lorraine had commented on how pretty it was, her smile a little too bright. The next day, it was gone from my jewelry box. When I confronted her, she'd feigned wide-eyed innocence. Oh, Judith, you're always losing things. You're so absent-minded. She'd said it with such condescending pity that I actually started to doubt myself. My mother, desperate to keep the peace in her new marriage, had told me to let it go. That locket was never seen again. For 25 years, she had been a master of gaslighting, of making me feel like I was the crazy one. The doorbell rang, pulling me from the bitter memory. Diane stood on the threshold, dressed in her typical all-black ensemble, a tablet clutched in her hand, her expression grim. She looked like a harbinger of doom. Show me, I said, my voice flat. I led her to the dining room table, the same table where I'd served the imposter pancakes just hours before. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. The woman your friend Brenda saw him with is, as you suspected, Lorraine Parker, your stepsister, she began, swiping through screens. Based on her social media footprint and some other data I acquired, their connection isn't new. We're talking years, not months. Images flashed across her tablet screen, each one a separate knife twisting in my gut. Lorraine and Russell at a charity gala I'd been too sick with the flu to attend 2 years ago. He'd said it was a boring work event. Lorraine and Russell at a cozy-looking bar in Miami last fall. On a weekend he was supposedly on a fishing trip with his college buddies. In every photo, they looked comfortable, familiar, like a long-established couple. But that's not the strangest part, Diane said, her voice lowering. Your building has a state-of-the-art security system. I pulled the logs. And I found this. She pulled up a video file from last Tuesday. There was Russell entering our lobby at 6:47 p.m., briefcase in hand, looking tired from a long day at work. It matched my memory perfectly. Looks normal, right? She said. Now, watch his shadow. She zoomed in. As he passed under the bright, crystal lobby chandelier, his shadow on the polished marble floor flickered, just for a fraction of a second, an unnatural digital stutter. It was almost imperceptible, something you would never notice unless you were looking for it. This is deepfake technology, Judith, she explained, her voice grave. Sophisticated, military-grade software. Someone has been digitally inserting a fabricated video of Russell into your building's security feed, likely in real time. This isn't amateur hour. We're talking about a professional, well-funded operation. The room started to spin. My home, my sanctuary, had been breached in the most insidious way possible. Why? Why would someone do that? To provide him with an unshakable alibi, Diane replied. To create a seamless, believable reality for you while the real Russell is elsewhere. She then delivered the final blow. I spoke discreetly to your elderly neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, the one in 3B with the 2 Persian cats. She confirmed she saw Russell leaving with 2 large suitcases 3 months ago. The weekend of that conference in Boston. He helped her with her groceries on his way out. He told her he was going away on a long project and that you'd be joining him later. 3 months. For 3 whole months, I hadn't been living with my husband. I had been living with a stranger. A paid actor. I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles turning white. This wasn't just an affair or a financial crime. This was something else entirely. Something out of a twisted, paranoid nightmare. And I was the star. That evening, I knew I needed one final, irrefutable piece of proof. Something visceral. Something that couldn't be faked by sophisticated software or a skilled actor. I needed a biological fact. Russell, the real Russell, had a severe, life-threatening allergy to shellfish. We discovered it the hard way on our honeymoon in Maine, a romantic lobster dinner that had ended with a terrifying, siren-blaring ambulance ride to the nearest emergency room. Since that night, he had been fanatical about it. He wore a medical alert bracelet. He carried an EpiPen in his briefcase, his car, and his bedside table. He would grill waiters about cross-contamination in the kitchen. It was a fundamental, unchangeable fact of his biology. So, that evening, as the imposter was on his way home from his squash game, I stopped at the market. I decided to cook a meal we hadn't shared in over a decade, Chesapeake Bay blue crabs, steamed and served with a big bowl of melted garlic butter. The man who walked through the door at 6:30 p.m., the man who looked and sounded exactly like my husband, seemed genuinely delighted by the aroma filling the apartment. Wow, crabs! You haven't made this in years, he said, dropping his gym bag and kissing my cheek. His lips were warm. His smile was perfect. He was a true professional. I felt like celebrating, I said, my voice as smooth and sweet as honey. I was performing now, too. 20 years of maintaining a poker face during high-stakes fraud investigations had trained me for this moment. I could compartmentalize the rage, the heartbreak, the sheer, mind-bending weirdness of it all. Right now, I was an auditor, and he was the subject of my final, decisive test. I set the steaming platter of bright red crabs in the center of the table. I watched him tie a bib around his neck, a playful grin on his face. My heart pounded a slow, heavy, deliberate rhythm in my chest. Thump. 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 He picked up a small wooden mallet. He took a claw and cracked it open with a satisfying thwack. He expertly pulled out the lump of sweet, white meat, dipped it generously in the melted butter, and brought it to his lips. He took a bite. He closed his eyes in pleasure. And then he took another. He didn't gasp for air. His face didn't start to swell. His throat didn't close up. He didn't reach for an EpiPen that I knew wasn't in his pocket. He just chewed, swallowed, and let out a sigh of pure, unadulterated pleasure. "This is incredible, Judith," he said, his mouth full. "Your grandmother would be proud." My grandmother, who had been dead for 15 years, would have been horrified. I was testing the man I thought was my husband like a laboratory rat, half hoping, half fearing he would collapse on our hardwood floor. But there was no denying the result. This man was not Russell Mercer. The rest of the dinner was the most surreal performance of my life. I played the role of the attentive, loving wife. I refilled his wine glass. I listened to him talk about his day at the office, a day he hadn't actually had. I decided to push further, to test the limits of his script. "I was thinking," I said casually, swirling the wine in my glass. "We should visit your mother this weekend. It's been a while since we drove out to her place in Connecticut." The real Russell's relationship with his mother was complicated. Toxic was the more accurate word. She was a deeply critical, controlling woman who had never approved of me. Our visits were rationed, negotiated for weeks, and usually ended with Russell needing days to recover from her passive-aggressive attacks. This man didn't miss a beat. He beamed at me across the table. "That sounds wonderful, honey," he replied, his expression one of pure delight. "She'll be absolutely thrilled to see us. I'll call her after dinner to let her know." He failed every single test. He was a perfect, flawless forgery. And as we sat there, sharing a meal under the warm, intimate lights of our dining room, I felt a chilling certainty. My real husband, the one who was a master of deception, had hired another master of deception to be his understudy. And I, the unsuspecting audience of one, was about to rewrite the entire play. That night, I lay in our king-sized bed, perfectly still, a silent predator waiting in the dark. Beside me, the imposter breathed, a deep, even rhythm of untroubled slumber. He'd fallen asleep within minutes of his head hitting the pillow, something the real Russell, a chronic insomniac who usually read until well past midnight, had never done. This man slept the sleep of someone with a clear conscience, no secrets, no stolen identity weighing on his mind. I waited. I watched the digital clock on my bedside table flip from 1 to 1:30, then to 2 a.m. I counted each steady breath, each rustle of the sheets, until I was absolutely certain he was deeply, immovably asleep. Then, with the careful, silent movements of someone disarming a bomb, I slipped out from under the covers. The floorboards were cold beneath my bare feet. His briefcase sat in its usual spot on the floor by the dresser. It was the same worn, dark brown leather briefcase Russell had carried for over a decade. I knew every scuff, every crease. But now, seeing it in the dim moonlight filtering through the window, it felt like a prop. A hollow object in a staged reality. My fingers trembled as I knelt and quietly unlatched the 2 brass buckles. Inside, at first glance, everything looked normal. A sleek laptop, files filled with official-looking investment reports, a leather-bound planner. It was all part of the costume. But tucked beneath a stack of portfolios, in a hidden side pocket, I found a plain manila envelope that didn't belong. It felt thick, heavy with secrets. My heart hammered against my ribs as I carefully, silently, pulled out its contents. The first thing I saw was a pay stub. It was made out to a Mr. Wallace Webb, with a residential address in Queens, New York. The next item was an actors' union card from SAG-AFTRA. The laminated photo showed a man who, without the expensive haircut, tailored suit, and veneer of wealth, looked like a vaguely familiar character actor you might see in a commercial or a small role on a crime show. But the most damning items, the ones that made a wave of nausea roll through me, were the handwritten notes. Pages and pages of them, in a tidy, unfamiliar script. It was a dossier. A character study. My life, our life, dissected and catalogued for a stranger to learn. On me. Judith likes her coffee with 1 sugar, no cream. Uses the forest green mug on weekdays. Calls her best friend, Brenda, pilot, every Tuesday and Thursday like clockwork. Anniversary is October 15th, prefers lilies to roses. She expects flowers but pretends she doesn't. Favorite movie, Casablanca. Always tears up during the final scene at the airport. Sensitive subject, her father's death 3 years ago from a heart attack. Do not bring up unless she initiates. Political leaning, moderate Democrat. Hates loud chewing. Secretly loves cheesy reality TV but pretends not to. My entire life, my personality, our shared history, our most intimate moments, all had been reduced to a series of cold, analytical bullet points. It was a script, prepared for an audition. A cheat sheet for someone hired to play the most important role in my life. Every inside joke, every shared vulnerability, had been catalogued and studied for this sickening performance. At the bottom of the last page, a final, chilling note was scrawled in a different, messier handwriting, a handwriting I recognized instantly as Russell's. 3 months maximum. Maintain cover at all costs. The transfer will be complete by then. 3 months. This elaborate performance had a hard deadline. And a singular purpose. The transfer will be complete. Transfer of what? It was obvious now. The complete and total transfer of our marital assets. Our home. My entire life. I carefully, methodically, photographed every single page with my phone, the tiny click of the shutter sounding like a gunshot in the silent room. My hands were shaking, not with fear anymore, but with a cold, crystalline rage. Then, I slipped the papers back into the envelope, placed it exactly where I'd found it, and closed the briefcase, latching the buckles without a sound. I crept back into bed, lying beside the stranger who wore my husband's face. He didn't stir. He was just an actor, a pawn playing a part. But my real husband, the director of this entire sickening production, was out there somewhere, preparing for his final act. And I realized, with a clarity that cut through my heartbreak, that I had to write a brand new, shocking ending to his twisted little play. The next morning, I feigned a vicious migraine, a classic, unimpeachable excuse that allowed me to retreat into the darkness of my home office with a cup of tea and my laptop while Wallace, the actor, went about his Russell routine with solicitous, feigned concern. Just rest, honey. I'll be quiet as a mouse. The performance never stopped. The moment the apartment door closed behind him, I wasn't just looking at our personal finances anymore. That was just the tip of the iceberg. I had to know if this deception, this rot, had bled into my professional life. My stomach was in a tight, cold knot of dread. I logged into my company's secure, encrypted servers. I was the head of the forensic accounting division at one of Chicago's top firms. My reputation for integrity was everything. My blood ran cold. The login records for my client database, a virtual vault containing the most sensitive financial information for the Fortune 500 companies I audited, showed multiple breaches. The access logs revealed logins from IP addresses I didn't recognize, all originating from untraceable servers in the Cayman Islands, Panama, and Cyprus. The same jurisdictions where our personal money was being laundered. Someone had used my credentials. My two-factor authentication. My biometric login. They had bypassed everything. And they had downloaded entire data archives from 3 of my biggest, most sensitive corporate audits. This wasn't just about stealing our retirement fund anymore. This was corporate espionage on a massive scale. The information in those files, merger and acquisition details, unannounced earnings reports, proprietary research, in the wrong hands, could be used for insider trading worth tens, even hundreds of millions of dollars. And the worst part, the part that made it hard to breathe, was that every unauthorized login, every stolen file, would trace back to me. To my user ID. To my passwords. To my security clearance. Russell wasn't just planning to leave me penniless in a messy divorce. He was planning to frame me for federal crimes. He was going to burn my entire life, my career, my sterling reputation, to the absolute ground to cover his tracks. I wouldn't just lose our savings, I would lose my professional license, face prosecution by the SEC, and potentially go to prison. The sheer, calculated cruelty of it was breathtaking. He had used our 17 years of intimacy, my unwavering trust, as a weapon against me. He knew my work passwords because I'd shared them with him years ago in case of an emergency. He knew my work habits, my client list, the very rhythm of my professional life. He and Lorraine were planning to disappear into a life of unimaginable luxury, funded by my money and my complete and utter ruin. I picked up the phone, my hand shaking so badly I could barely dial the numbers. I needed help beyond what Diane, a private investigator, could provide. I needed someone who understood the law from the inside, who understood how to fight criminals who wore $1,000 suits and had Ivy League degrees. I dialed a number I hadn't called in years. The voice on the other end was sharp, impatient. Meryl Stone. Meryl, I said, my voice shaking slightly but firm. It's Judith. Judith Mercer. I'm in trouble. Serious, 5-alarm fire trouble. Meryl and I had been friends, or at least professional allies, back when she was a feared assistant U.S. attorney and I was a frequent expert witness in her most complex financial fraud cases. Her own spectacular divorce from a federal judge who'd been caught taking bribes had ended her government career but sharpened her understanding of how the system could fail women. Now, she was the most ruthless, and most expensive, private lawyer in Chicago. There was a pause on the other end. My office. 30 minutes, she said, her voice all business. Don't talk to anyone else. As I hung up, I knew I had an ally. This was no longer just a personal betrayal. This was war. And I was about to go on the offensive. Meryl Stone's office was on the 85th floor of the Hancock Tower. It was a sleek, modern space of glass and steel that overlooked the entire city, a perch fit for a predator. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. I laid everything out for her on her vast glass conference table, the financial transfer records, the evidence of the stolen client data, the photographs of Wallace's briefcase contents. She studied the evidence with the focused, chilling intensity that had once made seasoned defense attorneys tremble in court. She didn't speak for a full 10 minutes, her sharp eyes darting from one document to the next. This is professional level, she finally said, her eyes hard as diamonds. Identity theft, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, securities fraud, money laundering. It's a federal crime buffet. But here's your immediate problem, Judith. Without the real Russell here to confess, and with everything technically authorized using his or your legitimate credentials, the authorities will move at a glacial pace. They'll open an investigation, sure. But by the time they build a case, the money will be long gone, and he and your lovely stepsister will be ghosts, living on some private island with no extradition treaty. So what do I do? I asked, a knot of despair tightening in my chest. Do I just let him win? Meryl leaned back in her chair and a slow, predatory smile touched her lips. Oh, no, she said softly. We don't wait for the wheels of justice to turn. We don't play defense. We burn his entire empire to the ground before he even smells the smoke. And so we did. For the rest of the day, fueled by black coffee and a burning, righteous desire for justice, we laid the groundwork for an ambush. First, I went back to my own office and did what I do best. I became a hunter in the digital wilderness I knew so well. I burrowed deep into our shared cloud storage, a space Russell still had access to and, I knew, checked obsessively. I created a series of beautifully crafted, official-looking documents with irresistible titles, Q3 Investment Review and Profit Projections, Offshore Tax Strategy 2025, Portfolio Diversification Analysis. They were bait. And inside the very code of each innocent-looking PDF, I embedded a silent, elegant little piece of software I designed myself, a financial virus. A digital bomb. The moment those files were opened from an international IP address, it would execute a three-pronged attack. First, it would trigger an immediate lockdown on every single account linked to his shell companies, freezing the assets. Second, it would copy every transaction record, every login attempt, every single digital fingerprint he'd ever left. Third, it would package that entire data trove and forward it directly to a dedicated server at the FBI's Financial Crimes Division, flagging it for immediate action. Russell's arrogance, his obsessive need to admire his stolen millions, would be his own downfall. Next, with Meryl coaching me on the precise legal language to use, I picked up the phone. It was time to sow chaos and doubt. My first call was to Robert Steinberg, the powerful, notoriously short-tempered CEO of Russell's biggest client. I kept my tone calm, conversational, the concerned wife. "Robert, it's Judith Mercer. I am so sorry to bother you at home, but I was reviewing some of our adjacent accounts for our tax lawyer and noticed a tiny irregularity in your company's investment portfolio. It's probably just a clerical error," I said breezily, but the pattern was a bit unusual. "You might want to have your internal audit team take a quick look, just to be safe." I planted the seed of doubt. Then I did the same with 2 other major firms. I didn't make accusations. I just raised polite, professional questions. By 9 o'clock Monday morning, I knew that 3 of the biggest companies in Chicago would be tearing their own financial records apart, launching frantic internal audits that would all point back to unauthorized access from credentials associated with one man, Russell Mercer. I was building a firestorm, and he had no idea he was standing in the middle of it, sunning himself on a beach in Hawaii. The trap was set. All I had to do now was wait for the rat to take the cheese. That evening, I decided I couldn't wait any longer. I had the financial trap set, but I needed a human element. I needed a witness who could tie it all together. I needed to break the actor. I found Wallace in the living room, reading a worn paperback copy of a play, The Picture of Domestic Calm. The lamp cast a warm glow on his face, the face of my husband. The absurdity of it all was dizzying. I stood in the doorway for a moment, gathering my strength. Then I walked in and sat in the armchair across from him. "Wallace," I said quietly. My voice was low, but it cut through the silence of the room like a knife. His whole body went rigid. His head snapped up from the book. He slowly lowered it to his lap, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and terror. For the first time in 3 months, the confident, charming mask of Russell Mercer had not just slipped, it had shattered. I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered, his voice suddenly an octave higher. But the polished, vaguely British accent he'd adopted for the role was gone, replaced by the unmistakable, rough-edged sound of Queens, New York. "The show is over," I continued, my voice as cold and hard as the granite on my kitchen counters. "I know who you are. I know you're an actor from Queens. I know you were hired. I've known since Tuesday morning." He put his head in his hands, a gesture of such genuine, pathetic defeat that my rage flickered for just a moment, replaced by a cold pity. "How long have you known?" he whispered, his voice muffled by his hands. "Since my best friend, the pilot of the flight your boss took to Hawaii, called me from the cockpit while you were sitting right here, eating my pancakes." He let out a long, shuddering breath and looked up at me, his face pale and slick with sweat. "I didn't know about the crimes," he said, his voice cracking with desperation. "I swear to you. Russell, he told me you two were separated, that it was all amicable. He said he needed someone to house sit, keep up appearances for some big business deal while the divorce was being finalized. He showed me what looked like legitimate legal papers. He paid me $20,000 in cash." He shook his head, looking utterly lost. "I thought it was weird, but, rich people do weird things. I thought it was legal." "Did you really believe that, Wallace?" I asked, my voice devoid of sympathy. "Or did you just not want to look too closely?" "I wanted to believe it," he said, his eyes pleading. "Judith. I've been a struggling actor for 15 years. Waiting tables, driving for Uber, watching younger, prettier guys get the parts one wanted. Then this guy, this polished, wealthy man, shows up at a casting call for a corporate role-playing exercise and offers me more money than I've ever seen in one place, just to live in a beautiful apartment and play a role. I didn't ask questions because I was desperate. I couldn't afford to. He then told me about a meeting with Russell where he'd started to get nervous, asking if everything was above board. Russell had laughed and told him not to worry, that it was just part of a complicated divorce settlement. He was another victim, in his own way. A pawn in Russell's twisted game, motivated by desperation. But my pity only went so far. "Tomorrow morning," I said, leaning forward, my voice hard and clear, "federal agents are going to arrive at this apartment. Right now, you have a choice. You can either be arrested as a co-conspirator in a multi-million-dollar fraud and corporate espionage case, and you will go to prison for a very long time. Or, you can cooperate fully, as our star witness, and I will have my lawyer advocate for leniency on your behalf." There was no hesitation. "Witness," he said immediately, the word rushing out of him in a torrent of relief. "God, yes, a witness. I'll tell them everything. I have documents. Contracts." He even made me record some of our phone calls, for training purposes, he said. He made me keep everything in a storage unit out in Queens, in case you got suspicious. He called it his insurance policy. The fool. The arrogant, overconfident fool. He had given me the final piece of the puzzle. I now had the actor's confession, the digital financial trail, and a storage unit full of hard copy evidence. Russell and Lorraine thought they were untouchable, sunning themselves on a beach in Hawaii. They had no idea that back in Chicago, their entire empire was about to come crashing down around them. The plan for the final act was audacious, theatrical, and utterly ruthless. It was Meryl's idea, delivered with a smile that was all teeth. "If he wanted a performance," she'd said, her eyes gleaming, "let's give him a finale he'll never forget. Let's give him an audience." So, using Wallace's phone to mimic Russell's digital signature, I had composed the email. It was a masterpiece of corporate hubris, an urgent, exclusive invitation sent to a very specific, hand-picked list, Russell's top 12 clients, his managing partner, and the biggest financial players in his professional circle. Subject, urgent and confidential, a special announcement regarding the future of Mercer Capital. "Gentlemen, please join me for an exclusive champagne breakfast at my home tomorrow morning at 7:30 a.m. sharp. An unprecedented and time-sensitive investment opportunity will be unveiled. Your presence is essential for the next phase of our mutual prosperity." It was arrogant. It was bizarrely timed. And it was exactly the kind of high-stakes power play they'd expect from a titan of finance like Russell Mercer. The RSVPs had flooded in within the hour. Wallace, now my terrified but compliant co-conspirator, spent the night on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, looking like a man awaiting his own execution. Neither of us slept. We just sat in the silent apartment, listening to the city breathe, waiting for the dawn. At 7:15 a.m., Wallace, dressed in one of Russell's finest suits, was pacing the living room, sweating through his silk shirt. The caterers I'd hired had set up a beautiful spread, champagne on ice, silver platters of pastries, freshly squeezed orange juice. It was a perfect stage set. At 7:30 a.m. sharp, the doorbell began to ring. They arrived in a fleet of black town cars. Robert Steinberg, the craggy-faced industrialist, looking confused but intrigued. Jennifer Wu from Phoenix Capital, immaculate in a Chanel suit, even at this ungodly hour. David Martinez from Meridian Financial. They clustered in our living room, a veritable who's who of Chicago finance, accepting flutes of champagne from a shaking Wallace, making awkward, speculative small talk. "This better be worth it, Mercer," Robert Steinberg grumbled, checking the diamond-studded Rolex on his wrist. "I canceled a breakfast meeting with the Seoul team for this." Wallace just nodded, swallowing hard. He looked at me across the room, sheer, unadulterated panic in his eyes. The script hadn't prepared him for this level of improvisation. I stepped forward, taking control, playing the gracious hostess one final, magnificent time. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," I said, my voice ringing with a calm, confident authority I hadn't felt in months. "Russell has a very important announcement. I know the timing is unusual, but I promise, you'll understand in a moment why your presence here today is so important." I watched the elegant grandfather clock in the corner of the room. The minute hand clicked forward. 7:58, 7:59. Then, right on cue, as if summoned by a stage manager, I heard it. Footsteps in the hallway. Not the shuffling of residents, but the heavy, purposeful tread of multiple people moving in sync. The doorbell rang. A single, formal chime. It was immediately followed by a firm, authoritative knock that seemed to shake the entire apartment door in its frame. The sound silenced all conversation. Every head in the room turned towards the door. I walked towards it, my heart not pounding with fear, but with a strange, exhilarating sense of victory. I took a deep breath, turned the knob, and opened the door. 6 FBI agents stood in the hallway, their faces grim, their jackets bearing the unmistakable gold letters. Badges were displayed. The lead agent, a woman with steel gray hair and eyes that seemed to see everything, looked past me and addressed the stunned room. "Federal agents," she announced, her voice cutting through the shocked silence like a surgeon's scalpel. "We have a warrant." The curtain had just risen on the final act. The living room, moments before filled with the low murmur of powerful men, erupted into a cacophony of confusion. Coffee cups clattered onto saucers. Cell phones were hastily pulled out. Robert Steinberg looked like he'd been struck by lightning. Agent Sarah Brennan of the FBI's Financial Crimes Division stepped into the apartment, her team fanning out behind her with a quiet, intimidating efficiency. They didn't have their guns drawn, but their presence alone was a weapon. "We're looking for Russell Mercer," she said, her sharp eyes scanning the crowd of bewildered executives. Wallace, who had been frozen by the window, pale as a ghost, raised a trembling hand. "That's me," he squeaked, his carefully constructed persona completely dissolving. His Brooklyn accent was now thick and undeniable. "Except it's not. I mean, I want to cooperate. I have all the evidence. I was hired to impersonate him. It's all in a storage unit." A collective gasp went through the room. Jennifer Wu was already on the phone with her legal team. "Mr. Webb," Agent Brennan said calmly, clearly already knowing his real name from the information I had provided. "You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud." As 2 agents moved forward and placed Wallace in handcuffs, he looked at me, not with resentment, but with something that looked like profound gratitude. "The storage unit," he said quickly, his voice urgent. "Queens Boulevard. Unit 447. The key is in my wallet. Everything's there. The recordings, the contracts, everything." While one agent read Wallace's rights against the backdrop of our expensive abstract art, my laptop, sitting innocently on the dining room table, let out a sharp, triumphant ping. The notification I'd been waiting for all morning. Merrill, who had been standing quietly in the corner, gave me a subtle nod. The financial virus had been activated. Someone in Hawaii had just tried to access the bait. On the screen, I watched in real time as a digital firewall slammed down. Accounts across the Caymans, Switzerland, and Panama froze simultaneously. Transaction records, encrypted files, and routing numbers were instantly packaged and forwarded to federal prosecutors. $47 million in stolen funds, locked in digital amber. Just then, Agent Brennan's phone buzzed. She answered it, listened for a moment, her expression unreadable. She ended the call and then looked directly at me before addressing the entire room. "Update," she said, her voice carrying an edge of finality. "Hawaiian authorities have them in custody. Russell Mercer and Lorraine Parker were arrested less than 10 minutes ago in the lobby of the Four Seasons Resort in Maui. They were attempting to charter a private jet to a non-extradition country." A wave of pure, unadulterated catharsis washed over me, so powerful it almost buckled my knees. "We got them. We actually got them." Agent Brennan then turned her attention to the stunned executives. "For the past 3 months, and likely longer," she announced, "Mr. Mercer has been using his position to steal corporate secrets and facilitate insider trading. Much of the sensitive information was obtained illegally through his wife's professional work as a forensic accountant. The man you've been meeting with was Mr. Webb, an actor, hired to maintain the illusion while the real Russell Mercer attempted to flee the country with your stolen assets. I picked up my own phone and found the audio file of Brenda's call from that Tuesday morning. I turned the volume all the way up. Her clear, professional voice filled the silent, horrified room. "I need to ask you something strange. Your husband, is he home right now?" The recording played out, detailing those first surreal moments of discovery. The gathered executives listened, the blood draining from their faces as they finally understood. They weren't here for an investment opportunity. They were here as the star witnesses to the spectacular, public unraveling of a massive fraud that could have destroyed their companies. They were here to watch justice be served. And it was, without a doubt, the most satisfying performance I had ever seen. If you've listened this far, please help me out by liking this video and commenting with the number 1 below. It lets me know you gave me a like, and it tells me you're right here with me on this journey. Your support is a huge encouragement that keeps me going. Please, comment with the number 1, and let me tell you the rest of my story. The months that followed were a blur of legal proceedings, depositions, and blaring headlines. The deceitful husband and the actor the Tribune called them. The stepsister betrayal. The story of Russell's elaborate fraud, his audacious use of an actor, and his betrayal with my own stepsister became a local sensation, a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties and country clubs. But for me, all of that was just noise. The real work was the quiet, methodical, and profoundly painful dismantling of a life. The apartment, our beautiful home that had once been my sanctuary, became first a crime scene, then an asset to be liquidated in the divorce. I hired a team of professional movers, unable to bear the thought of packing everything myself. Still, I had to be there to supervise, to decide what to keep, what to put in storage, what to donate, and what to simply throw away. I spent a full week sorting through 17 years of shared memories, and it was emotional torture. Every object felt tainted by the lie it had been a part of. The beautiful mahogany desk from his office? A prop for a stage. The leather armchair where he read the paper? A costume piece. I found myself standing in his closet, surrounded by his expensive suits and handmade shoes. I ran my hand over a silk tie I had given him for our 10th anniversary. I remembered the day I bought it, how excited I was to give it to him. Now, the memory felt like a scene from a movie about someone else's life. I systematically took every piece of his clothing and packed it into black garbage bags for Goodwill. Packing up the last box was the hardest. It was filled with old photo albums. I sat on the floor of the empty living room, the echo of my movements sounding unnaturally loud. I opened the first album. There we were, on our wedding day. So young, so hopeful, so genuinely happy. I stared at the smiling face of the man in the picture, the man I thought I knew, and I felt nothing. Not anger, not even sadness. Just a profound, empty disconnect. He was a stranger. And the terrifying thought that lodged in my heart was that maybe, just maybe, he always had been. The divorce was surprisingly swift. Faced with a mountain of irrefutable evidence, Wallace's detailed testimony, the entire contents of the storage unit, the frozen offshore accounts, and the cooperation of 3 major corporations, Russell's high-priced legal team had little leverage. He and Lorraine were extradited from Hawaii, their sun-kissed hands looking absurd in the harsh fluorescent lighting of a federal courtroom in Chicago. Their legal battles were just beginning. They were facing a laundry list of federal charges that would likely keep them in prison for a very, very long time. The judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s who had seen her share of financial predators, was particularly unsympathetic to their case. The divorce settlement, which Merrill handled with surgical precision, left me with the full proceeds from the apartment sale, all of the recovered funds from the frozen accounts, and a significant sum in damages. Money couldn't erase the betrayal or the surreal horror of the 3 months I spent living with a stranger, but it could buy me something I desperately needed, a clean slate. A chance to rebuild from the ground up. The day the movers came to take the last of the boxes, I did one final walkthrough of the empty apartment. The afternoon sun streamed through the bare windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The echoes of a 17-year marriage lingered like ghosts in the silent rooms. But for the first time in a long time, the silence didn't feel lonely. It felt peaceful. It felt like the quiet hum of freedom. I refused to be a victim. I refused to let what Russell and Lorraine did, the calculated cruelty of their betrayal, define the rest of my life. So, I took the one thing they tried to destroy, my professional expertise, my reputation for finding the truth in a labyrinth of numbers, and I turned it into my weapon and my salvation. 6 months after the arrests, after the dust had begun to settle, I leased a small, bright office space in a historic building downtown. I used some of the settlement money to furnish it not with cold, corporate furniture, but with comfortable chairs, warm lighting, and shelves filled with books. A simple, elegant brass nameplate went up on the door, J. Mercer Forensic Consulting. Specialists in marital asset protection and identity verification. Merrill had advised against using my last name, but I insisted. I wasn't going to hide. I was taking my name back. What started as a few word-of-mouth referrals from Merrill's clients quickly grew into a waiting list. It turned out, I wasn't the only one whose reality had been insidiously edited. My clients were women like me, smart, successful, capable women who had woken up one day to find their lives were built on elaborate, often technologically fueled, deceptions. Just last week, I helped a respected surgeon from the Upper East Side discover that her husband of 15 years had been using deepfake technology to appear at medical conferences in Geneva while actually running a separate, secret medical practice and a secret family in Miami. Before that, it was a Broadway producer who learned her spouse had hired 3 different lookalikes to maintain alibis for his affairs across multiple cities. Each case was a new layer of human deception to excavate, and I used the same meticulous, unforgiving tools that had saved my own life to bring the hard, cold truth to light for others. I was good at it. I was giving these women the one thing I had so desperately needed, proof. One afternoon, a letter with a simple, handwritten address arrived at my new office. The return address was from Dayton, Ohio. The handwriting was neat, precise. It was from Wallace. Dear Judith, he wrote. I hope this letter finds you well. I wanted to reach out now that the legal proceedings are finished. First, and most importantly, thank you. Merrill, your lawyer, told me that you spoke to the prosecutor on my behalf, arguing for leniency. Because of my full cooperation, the FBI recommended probation and community service instead of prison time. I am now teaching acting classes at a community college here in Dayton. I'm finally using my skills for something honest, something good. I tell my students about those 3 months. I don't use real names, of course. I frame it as a cautionary tale. About how the best performance of my life, the most convincing role I ever played, was also the worst, most destructive thing I'd ever done. Some roles, I tell them, aren't worth playing, no matter how big the paycheck. I read about your new firm in an online article. I saw what you're doing, the women you're helping. You've turned poison into medicine. That's a kind of strength I didn't know existed. I hope someday you find something real and true to replace what was stolen from you. With sincere regret and genuine admiration, Wallace Webb. I folded the letter and placed it in my desk drawer. He was right. I had found something real. In the wreckage of my old life, I had found a new purpose. And in helping other women reclaim their lives and their truth, I was slowly, surely, reclaiming my own. The story ends where so many of my stories, both good and bad, seem to end, with Brenda, at a small, family-owned Italian restaurant in our old neighborhood, a place called Giovanni's. The red and white checkered tablecloths are faded, the wine glasses are thick and chipped, but the pasta is perfect and it feels like home. Brenda was already there when I arrived, waiting for me at our usual corner booth, a bottle of Chianti already open and breathing on the table. She stood when she saw me, her pilot's uniform exchanged for jeans and a sweater, and pulled me into a hug that lasted just a little longer than usual. Through all of this, from that first terrifying phone call to the last legal document, she had been my rock, my co-conspirator, my sister in everything but blood. Look at you, she said, pulling away and holding me at arm's length. You look lighter. I feel lighter, I said, and I was surprised to find that it was true. She poured 2 glasses of wine. I propose a toast, she said, her eyes sparkling in the candlelight. To the woman who figured out her husband was in 2 places at once and brought down an international fraud ring with nothing but a spreadsheet and a plate of crabs. I laughed, a real, genuine laugh that came from deep in my belly. I clinked my glass against hers. And to the pilot who made the phone call that saved my life, I countered. And who had the presence of mind to take a picture. We sat there for hours, eating too much pasta and garlic bread, talking about everything and nothing. We talked about her latest flight to Rome, about a terrible blind date she'd been on, about the absurdity of Wallace's letter. The weight of the past year, which had felt like a physical burden I was carrying on my shoulders, finally felt like it was beginning to lift. So, what's next? Brenda asked, swirling the last of her pasta on her fork. For you, I mean. Not for the business. For Judith. I considered the question seriously, looking out the restaurant window at the bustling city street. 6 months ago, I thought my future was a clearly mapped-out road leading to a comfortable, predictable retirement. Now, at 47 years old, I was single for the first time in my adult life. I was a successful business owner in a field I'd practically invented for myself. And I was completely, utterly uncertain about everything except my next client appointment. I don't know, I admitted, and I was surprised by the honesty and the peace in my own voice. There was no plan. No 5-year forecast. The spreadsheet of my life was beautifully, terrifyingly blank. And that, I said, taking a final sip of wine and smiling at my friend, is oddly, wonderfully liberating. Russell tried to erase my life, to reduce me to a liability, a loose end to be tied up and discarded in his grand escape plan. He thought that without him, I'd be nothing. But he was so wrong. He didn't erase me. He freed me. I'm not the same woman I was on that ordinary Tuesday morning. I'm stronger. I'm wiser. And for the first time in a very long time, I'm the one holding the pen, writing my own story. And I have a feeling the best chapters are yet to come. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It means the world to me to be able to share it with you all. If you've been through something similar, or if this story resonated with you in any way, please share your thoughts and your own strength in the comments below. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories of betrayal, strength, and sweet, sweet justice. Take care of yourselves, and take care of each other.